The call came at 4:17 p.m., slicing through the calm hum of Gabriel Lawson's office like a siren in a church. The billionaire hotel owner, the man who built towers of glass above the Chicago skyline, answered without thinking. "Mr. Lawson." The voice on the other end trembled with practiced formality. "This is Officer Ramirez from Chicago PD. I'm sorry, sir, there's been an accident involving your son." The words hit harder than any market crash. The world tilted. Your son didn't make it. For the first time in 20 years, Gabe's knees went weak. If you've ever lost someone you couldn't imagine living without, stay with this story. It holds a truth that will shock you before it heals you. He left the 46th floor without his coat, without his wallet, without understanding where his feet were taking him. Chicago blurred past the car window billboards, gray winter sky, the metallic rhythm of the L train cutting through the air. At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, everything smelled like antiseptic and sorrow. When he said his son's name, Noah Lawson, 7 years old, the nurse's expression told him everything. A doctor led him through a hallway too white, too long, every footstep echoing like an accusation. Inside the cold room beneath a sheet lay the small still body that had once giggled through bedtime stories. Brown hair plastered to his forehead. Freckles that used to dance when he laughed. The boy who used to say, "Dad, I'm going to swim like a dolphin someday." Gabe's world collapsed in silence. He reached out but stopped halfway. The skin was too pale, too final. He whispered, "I should have been there." The doctor murmured something about time of death and drowning, but Gabe heard only the clock ticking somewhere above the hum of the vents, each second marking the start of a life he no longer wanted. He signed the paperwork with hands that didn't feel attached to him. Somewhere, his driver asked if he needed to go home. Home. The word felt like a lie. He walked instead toward a side exit and stumbled into a narrow alley behind the hospital, his grief spilling into the freezing air. Steam rose from a vent, and he sank against the wall suit soaked with tears and snowmelt. That's where he met her. "Hey, mister." The voice was tiny, wavering. He looked up to see a girl, maybe 6 or 7, standing by the dumpster, her red hoodie 3 sizes too big, her jeans torn at the knees. Her face was smudged, her eyes sharp. "You're crying," she said softly. "You shouldn't be alone." He almost told her to go home, but something in her eyes, the same kind of lonely his own son carried after his mother's death, made him pause. "What are you doing here?" he asked. She hesitated, glanced at the street, then said something he could barely hear. "Your boy, the one they said drowned." She bit her lip. "He's not dead." For a heartbeat, Gabe forgot how to breathe. "What did you say? I saw him," she whispered. "At the Lakeside Club." He coughed up water. Then a man with gray hair and a shiny watch took him. Put him in a black SUV before the ambulance came. She lowered her voice even more. He was wearing blue swim trunks with little yellow anchors. Gabe froze. Anchors. That was Noah's favorite pair. Nobody could have guessed that. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maya," she said, eyes darting toward the corner. "People say I make things up, but I don't. I write stuff down." From her pocket, she pulled a wrinkled napkin, scrawled with the shaky license plate number, IL 7ZX142. Next to it, a crude drawing of a man's hand wearing a heavy silver watch. His hands trembled as he took it. "How do you know that was my son? He's got a lightning-shaped scar behind his ear," she said instantly. "I saw it when he took off his swim cap." Said it hurt. Her certainty hit him harder than the doctor's words ever could. That scar was their secret, Noah's wizard mark, he'd called it. No one else could have known. The alley spun. Could grief make a child hallucinate, or was he the one losing his mind? "Maya," he said slowly, "why are you telling me this?" "Because people don't listen to kids like me," she said simply. "But I saw what I saw." And you looked like someone who needed to know." He looked at her skinny arms, folded chin, lifted in defiance of a world that had clearly failed her. Somewhere deep inside, a flicker of life broke through the fog. Hope, fragile and dangerous, but real. "Do you have somewhere safe to stay?" he asked. She shrugged. "Sometimes the shelter on State Street, sometimes nowhere." Her voice cracked slightly, but she hid it with a shrug. "Don't tell cops I talked to you. They'll send me back." "I won't," he promised. "But I need to find that car. I need to find my son." Maya nodded, serious beyond her years. "Then follow the plate." The car went south, toward the lake. She stepped back into the shadows, the red hoodie glowing faintly in the streetlight. "And mister," she called as she turned away, "don't believe everything rich people say. They can buy silence, but not the truth." When she disappeared into the snow, Gabe looked down at the napkin. The childish handwriting blurred behind his tears. He realized his hands weren't shaking from grief anymore. They were shaking from purpose. If there was even a chance that Noah was alive, he would tear the world apart to find him. He walked back to the street where his car waited. For the first time since the call, he looked up at the Chicago skyline, the city that had once made him feel invincible, and whispered to the wind, "Hold on, buddy. Daddy's coming." Then he called his attorney. "Get to the office," he said. "We're reopening everything." The storm had begun, and the truth was waiting just beyond the next turn. Snow fell hard over Chicago the next morning, blanketing the streets in a silence that made the city feel like it was holding its breath. In his office, overlooking Michigan Avenue, Gabriel Lawson hadn't slept. The napkin with the plate number sat beside his coffee mug, the ink smudged where his tears had fallen hours earlier. Every rational part of his brain told him this was madness, but logic had lost its authority the second that girl said his son's name. He called his lawyer, Daniel Pierce, a man who'd been with him since the first Lawson Hotel broke ground. "Meet me in an hour," Gabe said. "Bring someone from the medical examiner's office you trust. No press, no police." When Daniel arrived, his usual composure faltered. Gabe looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His eyes, hollow tie, gone sleeves, rolled up as if he'd been in a fight. "You're telling me you think Noah's alive?" Daniel asked. After the hospital confirmed what Gabe interrupted, voice low but sharp. "They confirmed a body that looked like him, that's all. I need to know if that boy in the morgue was my son or not." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "I'll make a call." 2 hours later, Dr. Evelyn Cross, a respected independent pathologist, entered the office carrying a sealed folder. "Mr. Lawson," she said, "I've reviewed the autopsy report for the child listed as Noah Lawson. Something doesn't sit right." Gabe's pulse spiked. "Tell me." "The report states drowning, but the indicators don't add up. No frothy fluid in the lungs, no water in the sinuses, and the skin tone suggests possible post-mortem immersion. Someone placed the body in water after death. And there's more." She slid 2 fingerprint charts across the table. Hospitals record infant footprints and fingerprints at birth. These should match your son's file. Gabe leaned forward. "And they don't." For a long moment the room was silent except for the hum of the radiator. Daniel exhaled slowly. Could it be a mistake? Dr. Cross shook her head. Not unless the hospital mixed up both prints and blood type. This boy's O negative. Noah Lawson is B positive. Whoever that child was, he wasn't your son. Gabe pressed his palms against the desk, staring down at the grain of the wood. The floor felt like it might vanish beneath him. The impossible had just become evidence. "Who signed the report?" he asked, Detective Monroe, Major, Crimes Unit. "I spoke to him," Daniel said grimly. "He refused to reopen the case. Claimed minor discrepancies are common with children's prints." He sounded tense, like someone who'd been warned to keep his mouth shut. Gabe stood and paced toward the window. Michigan Avenue stretched below people hurrying through slush, unaware that someone's world had just been rebuilt from the ashes. "Someone wanted me to believe my son was dead," he said quietly, "and they had help inside that hospital." He turned back to Dr. Cross. "Can you prove it? I can testify to what the data shows she said. But proving who staged it, that's another matter. Then I'll find out who Gabe," said, his tone hardening. After she left, Daniel sat down heavily. "You realize what you're walking into. This isn't just kidnapping, it's an orchestrated cover-up. You start pulling threads and people with money power or both will fight back." Gabe poured himself coffee, hands steady now. "Good," he said. "Let them." That night he returned to the lakeside club where Noah's lessons had been held. The pool was closed. Lights dimmed, the smell of chlorine lingering like a ghost. A janitor recognized him instantly. "Mr. Lawson, I'm so sorry about your boy," the man said. "We all are. Did you work that night?" Gabe asked. "Yeah," the man replied, "but security told us to stay out of the pool area when the paramedics came." "Can I see the footage?" The janitor frowned. Cameras went out. System rebooted around 6. Whole 40 minutes lost. 40 minutes, the exact window when Noah disappeared. Gabe's chest tightened. He thanked the man, slipped him cash, and left through the side door. Snow still fell, and the city lights bled into white. Back in his car, he called Daniel. "Pull every contract the club has: security vendors, maintenance, management. Somebody doctored that feed." While waiting for results, Gabe opened his laptop. He typed the plate number Maya had given him into an online vehicle database. Nothing. Then he tried cross-referencing it with private parking citations, delivery permits, tollway logs. Still nothing. Whoever owned that SUV had erased it from every system that mattered. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. Then he noticed something in the photo of the pool area taken earlier from a local news article. In the corner of the frame, almost hidden in reflection, was the faint outline of a wristwatch catching light. The same shiny watch Maya had described. Gabe zoomed in. The watch face had a distinct emblem, 2 wings intertwined. He knew that symbol. It belonged to Alder & King, a luxury brand gifted at corporate galas. Only a few dozen were distributed in the city last year. His assistant could trace everyone. The next morning she did. "Mr. Lawson." She said one of the recipients was Richard Faulkner, former board consultant for your company. Gray hair, early 60s. Retired 2 years ago. Faulkner. Gabe remembered the name. A man who once mentored his younger brother Colin and left under odd circumstances after a dispute about a resort deal. Daniel was skeptical. "You think Faulkner orchestrated a fake death for revenge? I think he's part of something bigger," Gabe said. Maya saw the car heading south. Faulkner owns property in Indiana near the lake. "Pull it up." They located a small estate outside Michigan City, remote, gated. It matched the direction the SUV had taken. Before they could plan a visit, Gabe's phone buzzed. Unknown number again. He answered, expecting silence. Instead, a woman's voice, shaky, afraid. "Mr. Lawson, this is Jenna Cole. I used to work for your family. I shouldn't be calling, but I know about Noah. They told me not to talk, that bad things would happen if I did. Who told you that I can't crash on her end?" Muffled shouting, then nothing. The line went dead. Daniel stared at him. "You're in deep now. We need protection, private security." "No," Gabe said. "We need the truth, and I know where to start." That night he drove to Navy Pier, the one place he knew Maya might return. The wind cut off the lake, biting through his coat. He found her near a closed hot dog stand, huddled under an awning, scribbling something in a notebook. She looked up, startled. "You came back?" "You were right," Gabe said, kneeling so their eyes met. "The boy in the morgue isn't my son." Her face softened. So you're going to find him. I already started. He handed her a wrapped sandwich and gloves. But I need you to remember every single thing. Anyone else you saw that day, any car face name, smell anything. Maya hesitated, then began describing a woman. Pretty dark hair, wore gym clothes, talked to the man before he took Noah. Gabe's breath caught. The nanny Claire, she had disappeared after the accident. Would you recognize her picture, he asked. Maya nodded. I never forget faces. Gabe stood snow whipping around them. The wind howled like the city itself was warning him to stop, but he couldn't. Somewhere out there his son was alive, and the same city that had built his fortune was hiding him. For the first time in days, Gabe felt something close to clarity. This wasn't a tragedy anymore. It was a puzzle, and he had just found the first missing piece. For 3 days straight, Gabriel Lawson barely saw daylight. His penthouse had become a command center lit only by computer screens and the steady pulse of determination. If there was one thing years in business had taught him, it was that people could fake emotions, documents, even death, but not money. Money always left fingerprints. Frank Doyle, the ex-investigator with a gut full of bad coffee and cynicism, hunched over his laptop at the conference table. I've traced the transfers around Claire, the nanny, he said. 45 grand came from a Delaware company called Westfield Logistics. On paper, they ship auto parts. In reality, it's a shell. Who's behind it? Gabe asked. Nemesis Holdings, Frank said. And here's where it gets dirty. Nemesis is tied to a consulting firm called Alder and King International. Remember the watch that girl described? That's their signature gift. Only senior partners wear it. Daniel frowned. So this isn't random. Someone inside a high-level network helped make your son disappear. Gabe rubbed his temples. Then we find who signed the checks. Frank smirked. Already did. Richard Faulkner. The name hit like a knife. Faulkner, his former mentor, once a trusted advisor at Lawson Hospitality Group, who vanished after an internal scandal years earlier. Gabe had thought he retired quietly. He was wrong. Frank pulled up property records. 2 years ago, Faulkner purchased an estate through Nemesis Holdings, a private retreat in Wisconsin near Lake Geneva. No taxes paid, no public listing. If I were hiding something, that's where I'd do it. The snow had turned the city silver by the time Gabe looked up. Then, that's where we're going. They left Chicago under cover of night, the highway stretching north like a cold scar through the Midwest. Frank drove. Gabe sat beside him, scanning aerial photos of the estate. A gated road, 2 security outposts, cameras facing the tree line. You sure about this? Frank asked. It's private property. I'm sure about my son, Gabe replied. They reached the edge of Lake Geneva just before midnight. The house appeared through the fog, a fortress of stone and glass perched above the frozen lake. The kind of place built for people who didn't want to be found. Frank parked behind a line of birch trees. Motion sensors on the front. But there's a service trail along the north ridge. They hiked through waist-high snow breath, fogging in the dark. When they reached a slope overlooking the property, Gabe lifted his binoculars. A single light glowed in an upstairs window. In that faint yellow square, he thought he saw movement, small, uncertain. His heart clenched. He's there, he whispered. They circled to the back, crouched near a delivery ramp. The metal door was locked, but Frank carried a toolkit. One twist, one click, and they were inside. Warm air rushed out, mixed with the smell of pine cleaner and something sterile, almost medicinal. They crept through a dim corridor until muffled voices drifted from the living room. Gabe froze. One belonged to Faulkner, calm, authoritative, too familiar. The other a woman's voice. Claire. You promised this would end quietly, she said, trembling. Faulkner's tone hardened. It will, if you remember your place. You were paid to keep the boy comfortable, not to grow a conscience. Claire's voice cracked. He asks for his father every night. Gabe's pulse thundered in his ears. He took one step forward before Frank gripped his arm. Not yet, he whispered. But then a sound broke through the air, soft, unmistakable. A child's cough. Everything inside Gabe snapped. He moved before thought could stop him, pushing through the door into the living room. Faulkner turned startled, but Gabe was already across the floor. Where is he? Faulkner tried to recover a smirk curling at the edge of his mouth. Gabriel, always dramatic. You should have stayed out of this. Gabe's hands curled into fists. You took my son. You lost your son the moment you chose profit over people, Faulkner said coldly. I just made sure you understood the price of arrogance. Frank entered behind him, gun raised. Step aside, Faulkner. A crash upstairs, then the faint cry of a child. Gabe bolted toward the staircase. In the second-floor hallway, a door stood half open. Inside, Noah sat on a bed, clutching a stuffed bear, eyes wide with disbelief. Dad, Gabe, fell to his knees beside him, pulling him close. I've got you, buddy. I'm here. Then gunfire erupted downstairs. Frank shouted for backup as glass shattered. Gabe grabbed Noah's coat and rushed toward a side exit, snow exploding under his feet as they fled into the storm. Behind them, sirens began to rise, the faint wail of approaching police. Hours later, as dawn bled, pale light across Lake Geneva, Faulkner was in custody, and Noah slept against Gabe's shoulder in the back seat of the SUV. Frank drove in silence. Gabe looked out over the frozen water, the reflection of the mountains faint on the horizon. They thought money could bury the truth, he said quietly. They forgot money leaves a trail. Frank nodded. And someone still holding the other end of it. Gabe stared ahead, his son breathing softly against him, and felt the weight of something larger than revenge and unfinished reckoning waiting in the shadows beyond the mountain road. The storm over Lake Geneva had quieted by the time Gabriel Lawson walked back into the interrogation room. Richard Faulkner sat in handcuffs, his silver hair disheveled, the famous watch now dull under fluorescent light. 2 deputies guarded the door, but Gabe didn't need them. He wasn't there to fight. He was there for answers. Faulkner looked up, that same boardroom arrogance flickering behind tired eyes. You shouldn't have come, he said flatly. You won, Gabriel. Go home. Enjoy your son. Pretend this never happened. Gabe stayed silent. He placed a folder on the table, bank transfers, shell company charts, property deeds. You built an empire of lies, he said quietly, and you used my family to keep it running. Why? Faulkner gave a slow, sardonic smile. Because you took everything from me first. Lawson Hospitality, the contracts, the recognition. You think you built that company with clean hands, the first expansion in Dubai. Remember, you cut corners, pushed bribes through consultants. Let people like me do the dirty work so you could stay the moral face of the brand. I made you a billionaire, and when the storm came, you let me drown. Gabe's jaw tightened. It doesn't justify kidnapping a child. Faulkner leaned forward, voice low. No, but it justifies reminding you what your moral theater costs. You built your life on my silence. I wanted you to feel what losing control really means. Gabe wanted to hit him to shout, but anger would only cloud what he came for. Who helped you? He asked. You didn't pull this off alone. Faulkner's smile faded. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me. He hesitated, then said, Your brother. The words hung in the air like smoke. Gabe blinked. Colin. Who else? Faulkner said. He came to me after you forced him off the board. Said you'd stolen the company out from under him, that he was nothing but your shadow. He gave me access to Lawson accounts, used corporate shells to funnel funds into Nemesis. Without him, I couldn't have touched your son." Gabe felt the floor tilt beneath him. Colin, the kid brother he'd sent to business school, the one he'd tried to protect after their father's death, had traded loyalty for revenge. "Where is he now?" Gabe asked. Faulkner laughed bitterly. "Somewhere warm." He knew this day would come. That night, Gabe stood by Noah's hospital bed watching the monitors hum steadily. His son slept peacefully, small fingers clutching the stuffed bear he'd refused to let go. Outside, the snow had stopped, and dawn spilled faint gold across the glass. Frank entered quietly. Faulkner's story checks out. Colin's name appears on several offshore transfers. Looks like he's been moving assets out of the company for months. We're freezing accounts now. Gabe nodded but didn't look away from his son. "He's my brother," he said softly. "Blood doesn't make a man family," Frank replied. "Choices do." The next morning, Gabe received a message. A private meeting request, no sender, just an address. A lake cabin 20 miles north. He knew who it was before he even read the coordinates. Against Daniel's advice, he went alone. The drive was quiet, the air heavy with something that felt like history catching up. When he arrived, the cabin looked peaceful, smoke curling from its chimney. Colin stepped outside, dressed neatly as ever, hands in his coat pockets. "I figured you'd come," he said. "You made sure I would?" Gabe replied. Inside, the fireplace crackled. On the table sat a folder thicker than any Gabe had ever seen. Contracts, internal memos, financial records, all stamped with Lawson Hospitality's logo. "This is your company's real DNA," Colin said. "The part you hid, bribes, tax shelters, employee hush payments. I didn't fabricate anything, I just stopped pretending." "You sold our name," Gabe said quietly. "I preserved it," Colin shot back, "before it destroyed us both. You built an empire on illusion, brother. I just decided to cash out first." He slid a document across the table. "Here's the deal. You sign over controlling interest in Lawson Hospitality. You walk away clean with enough money to live comfortably. I take the fall for Faulkner's mess. It ends here." Gabe stared at the paper. It was a corporate death warrant. "And if I refuse," Colin's voice softened, almost pleading, "then the board learns everything. Every deal Dad helped you bury, every under-the-table payment. You'll lose the company anyway. This way you keep your son out of the headlines." Gabe stood pacing toward the window. The lake outside was half frozen, half reflection. He could see both of them in the glass. Two brothers carved from the same ambition, destroyed by the same pride. "You know what's funny?" Gabe said quietly. "You think I'm afraid of losing the company, but I already lost everything that mattered when I thought Noah was dead. I won't sell my soul again to save a brand name." Colin's expression flickered, torn between anger and regret. "Then you'll regret it." "No," Gabe said, turning to face him. "You will." At that moment, headlights cut through the window. Frank stepped out of a parked SUV, phone in hand. Behind him, two federal agents approached the door. Gabe didn't say a word as they entered, read Colin his rights, and placed him in cuffs. Colin looked at him one last time. "You think this redeems you? You're still guilty, Gabe." "We both are." "I know," Gabe said, "but I'm done pretending not to be." As they led Colin away, snow began to fall again, soft and soundless. Gabe stepped onto the porch, watching his brother disappear into the storm. By the time he returned to the city, news of the arrests had already broken. Share prices plummeted, reporters swarmed, and board members panicked. But Gabe didn't hide. He called a press conference and stood before the cameras himself. "Yes," he said simply, "there were mistakes. Mine, my family's. And I'm done letting silence protect them. From this day forward, Lawson Hospitality will rebuild not on lies, but on transparency. For once, his voice didn't shake. When he stepped off the stage, Daniel met him with a quiet nod. That was the hardest part, he said. Gabe looked past the crowd, imagining his son's face, the small hand that had pulled him out of darkness. No, he said softly. The hardest part was losing him. Everything after that is just recovery. Outside, Lake Michigan shimmered under morning light. Somewhere beyond the noise and headlines, redemption waited not in power but in peace. The weeks after Colin's arrest felt like learning to breathe again. The media called it the Lawson scandal headlines, flashing words like family betrayal, corporate reckoning, and billionaire's redemption. Every story twisted the truth into something more dramatic, but for once, Gabriel Lawson didn't care. He wasn't fighting for his name anymore. He was rebuilding his life from the inside out. Noah was healing faster than anyone expected. The doctors at Northwestern said he was resilient, stronger than he looks. Gabe sat beside his bed every night, reading the same worn copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, because that's what his son asked for. Some nights, Noah would fall asleep halfway through, fingers curled around his father's hand. Other nights, he'd wake from nightmares and whisper, "It's over, right, Dad. He can't find me anymore." Gabe would nod and say, "He'll never hurt you again." And for the first time, he believed his own words. Frank visited often, bringing updates from the investigation. Faulkner had taken a plea deal. Colin's trial was pending, but the evidence was overwhelming. Several executives resigned after forensic accountants uncovered a web of offshore funds. The empire Gabe once thought unshakable had collapsed, but in its ruins something cleaner was beginning to form. One evening, Daniel came to the hospital with a proposal. "You've got the public's attention," he said. "If you want to make real change, now's the time. Use the platform before someone else does." Gabe looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. "What if I don't want to talk about wealth or redemption? What if I want to talk about accountability?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Then talk about that." A week later, Gabe stood on the steps of the Lawson headquarters, the same place he'd once unveiled a new luxury resort, and faced a sea of reporters. For years, he began, I believed, success excused silence. I was wrong. Power doesn't make you untouchable. It makes you responsible. He announced the immediate restructuring of the company. 50% of its shares would transfer to an employee trust, giving longtime staff real ownership. The rest would fund a new initiative, the Lawson Foundation for Families, focused on supporting children of missing or incarcerated parents. He didn't hire a PR firm to write the speech. He spoke from the heart, his voice rough, his tone unpolished, but real. Cameras clicked, pens scratched, but the room stayed quiet when he said, "The real measure of success isn't what you own. It's what you can rebuild after losing everything." When he stepped off the stage, Frank handed him a small photo envelope. Inside was a picture, grainy but unmistakable, of Maya Brooks, the girl who started it all. She stood near Navy Pier, red hoodie zipped to her chin, hair pulled back, smiling shyly at the camera. Frank said she'd been placed in a safe foster program run by the city. "Kids tougher than steel," he said. "But she asked about you." The next afternoon, Gabe drove to the community center where Maya was staying. She was sitting by a mural she'd helped paint bright blues and yellows, a lighthouse in the center, its beam stretching into a stormy sea. When she saw him, her face lit up. "You kept your promise," she said. "I had help," Gabe replied, crouching beside her. "That night you found me. You saved more than my son. You saved me too." She shrugged, embarrassed. "I just told the truth." "That's the hardest thing most people never do," he said. He handed her a small envelope. Inside was an acceptance letter from a scholarship program, full tuition mentorship and housing support, sponsored by the new Lawson Foundation. Her hands trembled as she read it. "Is this real, as real as you were that night?" Gabe said. Maya blinked fast, trying not to cry. "You're not going to forget me when you get all busy again, right?" He smiled. "I've had enough of being busy. I'd rather be present." She nodded, still hugging the letter. "Then maybe you can come to the mural unveiling next month. They're naming it The Light Keeps Going." "I wouldn't miss it," he said. That night back home, Gabe tucked Noah into bed. The city hummed outside, soft and forgiving. On the wall above Noah's head hung a framed drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. In crayon, Noah had written, "Me, Dad, and Maya." For the first time in a long while, Gabe allowed himself to sit still. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore, it felt honest. He walked to the balcony, the lake stretching out like glass, and thought of all the people who'd helped him find his way back, Daniel with his steady counsel, Frank with his grit, and a little girl with courage enough for them all. The next morning, he returned to the office, not as a CEO, but as a man rebuilding from truth. The lobby was different now, less marble, more light. A plaque by the entrance read, "Integrity is the foundation that outlives every empire." He ran his hand across it and smiled. Months later, the Lawson Foundation's first center opened on the south side. Children filled the hallways, some laughing, some shy, all safe. Maya was there helping hand out art supplies, her red hoodie replaced by a volunteer badge. Gabe watched from the doorway, his son beside him. "Why's she painting another lighthouse?" Noah asked. "Because," Gabe said, resting a hand on his shoulder, "light doesn't stop just because the storm does." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, clean, and new. And for Gabriel Lawson, the man who once believed money could fix everything, the truth had finally settled deep in his heart. The richest life is the one you rebuild with love, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again. When the storm finally cleared from the skyline of Chicago, Gabriel Lawson stood as a man entirely transformed. The empire he once built from glass and gold had crumbled, but what rose from its ashes was something stronger, something human. His journey had begun with the sound of a phone call that shattered his world and ended with the laughter of 2 children in a sunlit community hall. Between those moments stretched a path carved by loss, truth, and redemption. He had faced betrayal from the people closest to him, his mentor, his own brother, and even himself. Each of them had been swallowed by ambition, by the lie that wealth could shield them from consequence. But it was the smallest voice, the trembling whisper of a poor girl named Maya, that pulled him back toward the light. Through her courage, Gabriel learned that the truth, no matter how fragile or inconvenient, carries more power than the richest empire. The night he believed his son was dead had broken something inside him that could never fully mend. Yet, in that same moment of despair, he found the beginning of wisdom. Love, he discovered, isn't a luxury to be earned once success is achieved. It's the foundation that keeps success meaningful. The boardrooms and contracts that had once defined him now felt small compared to the sound of his son breathing peacefully in sleep, or the sight of Maya painting hope into the walls of a shelter. By the time the world saw him again, standing before cameras not to defend his reputation, but to confess his faults, Gabriel had stopped caring about how the story looked from the outside. He cared about what it meant. The man who once measured everything in profits now measured his days in purpose. His company, once a monument to excess, became a vehicle for service. His wealth, once guarded like armor, became a resource to heal what greed had broken. In the end, Gabriel didn't rebuild the empire he lost. He built a legacy instead. One rooted in empathy, transparency, and courage. The kind of legacy that outlives balance sheets and stock prices. His son Noah grew up knowing that strength wasn't found in power, but in forgiveness. Maya, the brave little girl who spoke up when everyone else stayed silent, grew into a young woman who taught others that even those who have nothing can change everything with one act of truth. And for Gabriel himself, the greatest reward wasn't redemption, it was peace. The quiet peace that comes from looking at your own reflection and seeing not a perfect man, but an honest one. The lesson from Gabriel Lawson's story is one every person can carry into their own life, that success without integrity is emptiness disguised as victory. You don't have to be a millionaire to lose sight of what matters. You just have to start believing that what you own defines who you are. But the real measure of wealth is found in how deeply you love, how bravely you tell the truth, and how willingly you rebuild when everything falls apart. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in redemption and courage, and in the quiet power of doing what's right, then stay with us. Subscribe to our channel, share this story, and help us keep creating the kind of heartfelt, meaningful tales that remind the world no fortune is greater than compassion, and no ending is final when love decides to begin again.